And here we are. Welcome back. It is an episode of Dualistic Unity Raw. And of course, I say welcome back if you are tuning in again, because about 2 hours ago, we recorded episode 34 of season 6, which was really exciting and fun to record. It was really refreshing to be able to chat a little bit about the organization, Dualistic Unity. And I say organization kind of laughingly, given how organically this has all been growing. But it's been just a hell of a fun day so far. And of course, it's Canada Day. Happy Canada Day, anybody, if you are in Canada. Um, Not that that's something to be overly excited about in general, but happy day. And if it's a holiday for you, then hell yeah, get out there, enjoy the weather, enjoy your free time, enjoy what it is to be you, I guess is what I'm saying. But not sure where this episode's going to go today. It's kind of a grab bag because there's been a lot of lessons lately, a lot of lessons in terms of just getting out of the way as always, but also recognizing, I guess, how much things change. I never thought that it would seem so obvious that I'm not what I think I am. Like, it always felt like such an uphill battle to remind myself I'm not what I think I am. That now it almost feels odd when I do fall into it. Not almost, it straight up feels odd. Like, I feel off. I feel off. I feel like there's a wall between me and reality. It's almost like somebody's covered me with a blanket, and that someone is me. But it feels off when I'm thinking about myself as if I am actually thinking about myself rather than some conceptual convenience that my brain must have in order to process context. Because that's the difference, is that I understand that the way my brain works, in order for it to figure out who I am, where I fit in amongst all of this, and thus analyze all the dangers and considerations and everything else, it must have a me to fit into that equation. And so it creates one. Yeah. And I make the mistake of thinking, no, that's actually me, instead of being a momentary fragment needed to complete the picture. And that's why it's always changing. So if it's always changing, then it can't be me unless I'm always changing, in which case it still can't be me because I can't cover every thought about me that I could have. Mm-hmm. I'll never see the whole me. That's why I have my entire fucking life, and that'll never be enough time.
Yeah. It really, like, when you settle into that, when you relax, the feeling of so much more of a fullness of reality of your life, of situations, because when it's not about you, it's about this. It's about the experience that you're having. It's prioritizing that, and I think we're almost able to overlook the experience that we're having by looking to other things, like looking into our mind for some sense of certainty, looking forward to things. And as we do that, to have this sense of like being in another spot, if we're, in our head, focused on something, trying to create some guarantee that'll happen next, and then assume that we could do that, like assume the potentials in our head, the assumption that that thing's gonna help me in some way be more me, be more relaxed. It's like the opportunity to relax is right here. And so it just depends on where your priority sits. And I think, the experience of being relaxed can feel like enough. Like it feels like if you actually are relaxed, like those moments where you're not really thinking about anything so much, like prioritizing yourself and what is best for you individually, it's a different experience. And then there isn't so much of a reason to try to get to somewhere that could be better, because like the opportunity for that is still here. The opportunity for your experience is still here. It's not so much about even another possible place that could be quote unquote better. It's like it would be impossible for that to be so. All of the potential for yourself is right here. Like all that potential to relax is here. And the more you're trying to control, the more components of steps, of paths, of directions that you're trying to stay in control of, it's like that's the relaxation getting divvied. out to all of those things. And it's like there can be very little left potential for it. But again, even the relaxation, sometimes I can talk about that like it's silver bullet, and then create this idea that if you are tense, then it's like you're doing something wrong. It's like, no, there's something there, but can be in the sense of, the spectrum, a more common experience, the potential for it, when it's like it's not you at the forefront of every choice, of every decision, of every move that you make.
Okay, so I like this because, again, this is a raw episode. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. So we do try to pay attention to the comments section on wherever it is we're streaming.
Right.
We have a great question that goes in line with this. Is there anything to unify?
No.
To unify implies that it's separate, and if nothing is separate, if everything is existing in this moment, if all of potential, if all of existence is here existing, then it doesn't. The only thing that would be, you'd only unify it in concept only. You wouldn't actually unify in reality, in application. It would be entirely in concept.
And I would say even possibly in the experience itself, because while the experience is always going to be dualistic and always the product of the perception of division, there's the exacerbation of that division, right? Like the less that you yourself are perceiving that division, the more unifying of an experience you're creating for yourself and everyone else. It's not that there is more unity per se, but you are reflecting more of that optional state of mind, that state of experience. And so everybody around you, by virtue of that, also gets that. It's not that there's suddenly more unity. It's just that you've changed your experience from being excessively divisive to divisive by necessity.
And how close can it get to just divisive by necessity? And again, like there's the steps, like we were talking about in the episode before, like the steps to that sort of experience of it being more a component of reality, and like the spots in place being allowing for more potential in that sense. But like when it comes to the reality of unity, it's like if it's always the case, then it is just about what kind of experience of unity do we want. So you can only get further from that, like as you try and create unity or intend to have, like try and make more unity. Like it's really the try. It's like a cell pushing from the body, trying to oftentimes not be the body, even in the direction of unity. It's like if it's based on the root, on the assumption of division to begin with, then that's going to have certain actions that would be taken without as much sensitivity. Like it can still be in that tree where the root is like me doing it, like priority being me unifying instead of relaxing into the process of what's actually happening. And that is different as you're not dividing yourself so much. You're not parsing yourself out into so many different ideas and shoulds and shouldn'ts and all this stuff that we can focus in ourselves, and that focus becomes more just immediate. It expands out a little bit more, and the things that do or don't make sense, like it's not how it fits in to that track or perspective, or that one track that you were focused on, the path that you were focused on getting to, because like that's where all the stuff was happening. When it's here, it's like, how does this play into this whole experience of here? Like being selfless, altruistic, like that improves reality's experience. Like that's a component of your experience still. Like it's the prioritization of your experience can expand so much more when it's the foremost thing that you're looking at, is like I'm prioritizing my experience right now, and just like expanding from there each time. And like that experience can get more expanded and grow from that spot where it is like I'm prioritizing it right now. instead of about
Mhm.
where it's going or what should be happening.
Right. And we tend to prioritize the things that we decide to some degree that are worthwhile. We prioritize the things that we value. And so we're valuing the experience more. And so it's becoming a lot easier to prioritize this experience when its value, with its inherent value, is more so recognized. And in that it almost seems effortless, this expansion, because the idea of this moment, the idea of you, the idea of what you could mean expands. And in that, so does the experience. Because usually it's the concept or the definition or the description that's most limiting. So if you can expand your description or what you could consider a possible description, you automatically expand your experience of that which you describe, which is usually in most of our world.
See, I like this conversation because, again, it goes back to a discussion that we're having with people who believe in God, right? Who believe in a God. There was a question here. Hold on, I'll go back to it. That kind of ties in. Do you think Brahman is a device of pseudo security? Brahman being very close to what we're saying in terms of like the concept of God. What is everything being the experience of division from that? And Brahman in the Hindu, I don't want to say religion, but in Hinduism, in the Hindu practice, is everything. Everything is Brahman. Everything. All of the gods that are within Hinduism are all Brahman in a different form, playing a different role.
I love that.
Very cool. Very cool. But nonetheless conceptual. And that right there is the trick, or rather, the catch in terms of the relationship with God, which is that as soon as it's a concept, you're no longer experiencing it. Right?
Yeah.
That's it. And anybody who is sunk into that experience that you were talking about of just being where they are, just experiencing what they're experiencing, of getting out of the way, has experienced what others have described as flow state or inspiration. Right? These words that we've used describe a state that is accessible to us when we're not thinking about the fiction of ourselves. Others would call that enthusiasm. The etymology of enthusiasm is to be possessed by God, which is hilarious. But the belief in God immediately creates a conceptual division.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden, it has characteristics very much like your own because you are thinking about yourself, and thus it is reflecting your thought about yourself. And this goes back to, do you think Brahman is a device of pseudo security? It can be. It can be, unless it is recognized for what it is, a concept. A concept to describe what is, a concept to try and even communicate the spectrum of experience within what is. But where we get caught is, as Krishnamurti said, in thinking that the description is the described, that Brahman is a thing, rather than simply a way of describing what is, right? In an overarching way that includes everything, in the same way the word God does. Damn good question.
Yeah, because as soon as there's that concept of God, like it necessitates, sort of creates a idea of yourself, and like that, the relaxation and the experience of, flow state and enthusiasm and all those things that we look to as like sort of like cool experiences to have, and like we talk about them as almost like subjects or topics, especially flow state being something people want to like figure out how to do. Yeah, get it. Like take a pill that puts me in flow state or something. Like that's almost, I can see that play out where someone wants to, take the easy way, take the shortcut, as opposed to it just being an experience that you have, it not be even being similar to God, like a conceptual thing. It's just the experience that's left when there isn't so much of just a prioritization of yourself, or the seriousness and the rigidity that comes from prioritizing yourself. Like the experience itself is a little bit more relaxed. It's like there's a spectrum of flow state right there. And then, as you delve into a situation where maybe you are a little bit more tense, a lot of that time it stems from, yourself shifting to like a little bit more of a priority or more at the forefront of my experience right now has become more like about me than it has about the experience itself. And so there's a different experience right there. Whereas if for a moment, I stop taking myself so seriously, and all of a sudden it's like you're a little bit more relaxed and you're like, oh yeah, I don't have to panic necessarily, because I can keep going, and I can just relax. And then sometimes just like, all right, that's where I'm gonna stop.
That's fair. That's awesome. We have follow-up questions. God, I love raw episodes. First one is that a double-double?
Yes.
Indeed it is. Indeed it is. The second one is, so you're agnostic. And I find that question to be fascinating, because no, I would say no. And it's because what we're saying is that the reality is never the concept. So as soon as you're entertaining the idea of a God, you are no longer dealing in reality. Now you're dealing in concepts. So I would say to the question, is there a God? There's no answer to that, because you're asking, is there an idea of an overarching intelligence? To which I would say, yeah, there's lots of ideas for sure. What is the reality behind the concept of God? And I would say that while I would say there is a God, I would say that it is you. So is that still a God if it is you? Because you are what is. You are the awareness of reality. You are existence itself, experiencing yourself through infinite facets. Would you call that God? Because it's you. The entire concept of a God is external. It is merely a concept.
Right.
Out there, somewhere else, something to believe in. So even, we were talking about the two tree sort of imagery. It's like so many of the things that someone will ask about, like, oh, well, what religion is, this closest to? Is it, Buddhism? Is it this? Is it that? Like, I'm curious how, I could get into this. And it's like, it's a different sort of tree, and the foundation of it, like, because it can feel like, talking about, oh, two different trees, like it's this sort of separate thing, like you gotta do things to like jump from tree to tree. And it's not really that so much. It's more of a priority, where the priority shifts on a spectrum. And like, I think that the trees, they're a nice, imagery for just like that. It stems from something else. Like the question of, are you agnostic, is like, that's kind of on that tree, assuming the, concepts are true. The description is the described. Like the way I think about something is what it is. My idea of air is actually air. And it's like, no, it's not. And there's a difference there. And that's, on this other tree. But in the experience of it, it's still this swaying spectrum based on your priorities, which is a all-encompassing prioritization of, the moment, but your life in general. Like how you're living your life is kind of a expansion from how much you're prioritizing your experience. And then that shift in priorities, then there tends to be this shift in, an internal experience when it isn't so focused on, external stuff, superficial stuff, like things about me that mean something about me. And so, yeah, the question of agnosticism, though, I think is just, if it's stemming from like, is this something I could be too? And like all of the identity based stuff, it's like, yeah, it's a different sort of conversation.
Right. Well, I mean, the question kind of gives you a lot when it's saying like, so you're agnostic. It's like, so can I describe you in this way? Can I define you, limit you, put you in a box, check, and it's just like, it's never just that, even if you can say, I am leaning towards this, generally I do have a tendency towards this direction. Generally, usually, typically feels like it's more accurate. But almost I wouldn't need to specifically say typically usually if we just didn't treat words and concepts with such absolute framing. You know, when we use words, when we use concepts, we use them in an absolute manner. You know, I like it. That sounds absolute.
My favorite.
You know, but if I would to read that and be like, I like that, it's like, yeah, most of the time, generally, you know, like typically, or to hear someone say, oh, I like this, and to know that that could change at any moment, right? Instead of it being like, oh, I've asked you this question to learn about you so that I now can say that I know you, that I know you compared to me, that I could know the internal versus the external. And it's not so black and white to be like you're agnostic or you're not.
And admittedly, like, it's a good question
It is.
because we're trying to figure out what this conversation is all about. But the same person, and I love this, said words are so reductive. So they went into
I
it
love
recognizing, like,
Yeah.
I have no choice because I can't just stare at the screen and hope that you'll telepathically read my mind yet.
I was gonna say, or can we? Don't you
Right.
limit me, sir.
But it's just that it's like I'm using the concepts, and there's nothing wrong with that. Again,
No.
it's just the overinvestment in them, I think, and they're always really tempting to overinvest in because they give you a sense of security in your head.
Mhm.
You know, when faced with the reality of the unknown of each and every moment, it's very tempting to reach inside your head, carve yourself a little room, and say, "This is what reality is," and now I know.
Yep.
So that way, you don't have to face the next moment for what it is. You can face your idea of it, your opinion of it, you know, your assumptions of it. No longer facing it in its rawest form. No longer facing God.
No longer paying attention.
In fact, right, which is the funniest part about it. It's always, that's the point. This is why, again, like, religion has fallen so far away from the original conversation about existence as a whole,
Mhm.
not about some deity that's, you know, in control of everything and watching,
Right.
but rather the conversation about existence and our connection to it as
Yeah.
it. What does all of this mean? And that's why I enjoy this dialogue very much. And again, I want to say to everybody, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you being on our channels, wherever they might be. It's ultimately super productive. Exactly.
Mhm.
We do have another question. We've got actually quite a few questions here, which I love. And thank you, everyone. Guys, I just found this non-dual experience thing. What books should I read? So I would say first answer to that is be very careful about the expression non-dual, because there's a whole thing that goes with that ends up becoming another philosophy, another practice of memorizing more concepts, of trying to describe reality in a different way. If I was to say anything, rather than looking at this as a non-dual experience, look at this as an authentic experience, an experience wherein you have the capacity to not second guess yourself, to not superimpose your thoughts about your life over your life, to actually have an experience each and every moment that is so authentically your experience that you are not thinking about yourself or analyzing yourself. And in that is a unified experience within duality.
Mhm.
So rather than trying to get to a non-dual experience, which will never happen, come to a unified experience of duality, which is to be yourself without second guessing it. That said, if you do want to read some books, I highly recommend Krishnamurti and Alan Watts.
Amen. Yeah, it's like you're with the conversation, even of the non-dual stuff, like that whole thing can be this conversational thing, and it becomes another thing that's like an option to talk about. But if it's still self-defining, you're still prioritizing that. Like if it's about the words that you're saying, I think that can be a shift. Like if it's about saying any degree of correct words whatsoever, like the words mean anything at all, as opposed to the experience that stems from the words being expressed, then it's like this conceptual thing. And then you can get to this point where like, and I feel like I had an experience where I got so honed into trying to say it perfectly. Like I remember a running interview I did where I was leading up to it. I was like, all right, this is a cool opportunity to like talk about the podcast. A lot of people might see it. Like, how do I say it perfectly. And it was like this point where I was like, there's got to be a way to like get it across, say it. And it's all words. It's all about the words. The words are the priority. So that can very much then, if it is the priority, be like a way that you talk and you try and frame everything like that. You try and get to the point in the conversation where it is a component of the discussion because it becomes like a comfort zone. And that, I think when you're defining yourself as non-dual or talking about non-duality, it's like that's that. Like the words are the more of the priority, but when it's not at all about the words, when it's like how relaxed are you in expression, period. You know, whether you're dancing, singing, talking, interacting with someone, like watching a movie, like how attentive to the experience you're having, how relaxed you are. There's going to be an expression via words that maybe lean towards certain topics or talk about certain things from time to time if it's on the table, because it's fun, but it's more so about the experience where it comes from, as opposed to what specifically is expressed and trying to carbon copy that into your own words or expressing the same words. It's like, no, there's a root that's coming from, and it's more about your experience right now than any sentence or phrase or thing you discuss or thing you get across to someone. Like, are you getting your experience across to someone, or are you trying to share some wisdom with them?
Right. I like that. Just prioritizing the experience more, and in doing that, the words are just, like you said, an expression of the experience, and it's a lot easier for them to kind of pick themselves because the expression it's less of like getting the experience across and just letting the experience be the bridge almost. It's fun to almost like to be trying to describe that, because it's describing how the words are the smallest piece of that puzzle, but yet I don't know, it's
like there's a shift in the words when your sensitivity shifts almost in your interactions, you know, and there can be like not a draw necessarily, but like because you're more sensitive and authentic, it's like the words you express are as well. So like they change, but yeah, it's like
they fall into your lap. You know, that like that's what I was trying to describe. I'm like, damn, how do you describe like the effortlessness? And it's just yeah, like they kind of fall into your lap because the experience is so wholly embodied that just a part of that embodiment is describing it. But the description is so secondary to the experience that you don't necessarily have to pick the words, because the words are picking themselves as the experience is just unfolding.
We have a number of questions. Another one, and I'm curious to see what both of your answers are. What's the topic right now?
You.
Existence.
In
also
different
you.
ways. Life experience, the foundation of experience.
Sensitivity.
Right. Authenticity.
Right
now. Expression. Just the topic is topicless because like don't really choose it or feel a need to choose it. Just kind of plays out and happens, which is cool when things do that. You know, like the last episode we ended up, you know, talking about company sort of business stuff, combining it with the like mentality, description, whatever. Like great conversation that had more of a specific vibe to it. There wasn't the thought of that. It's just an expression of right now. There's a lot of cool, exciting shit going on, and that was then expressed there. There might be a day where, you know, one of us just went through something, and then response to that topic becomes something. So
that's pretty much what we do.
Pretty much.
That's why it's so important that we get out there and do stuff. And that's why even what we do on the business side of things is really exciting, because a lot of this stuff we've never done, right? So we're interacting with different people, learning different skills. And then when we're not doing that, we're out socializing, helping local community interests and groups and stuff, and just all kinds of endless content. So yeah, basically we're talking about just being you. in a world where you think you have to be something, and that causes so much of your stress.
Mhm.
We have another question. Do you think that pre-agricultural times were more relaxing?
Mm.
When there,
Pre-agriculture. So before we were farming, when we were in the fucking jungle running from predator, like actual like lions and cougars and predators and other tribes. No, I don't think so necessarily. I feel like the danger, like life, changes shape, but it is always there. Just like opportunities and potential change shape, but yet it's always there, more or less, and about the same amounts, which is just existence is always here in the same amounts, just changes shape constantly. And we think that because it changed shape, it's now somehow different.
I think that when there was opportunities to relax, like there was probably more actual relaxation, but like it was still when it was like the full spectrum thing.
Relative.
Of course, because I had the same thought. I was like, so we were like out and about, yeah, like
Nomads
in nature
with no
like,
home.
Yeah, I'd be wiping after a little journey to go, throw a spear at a cougar or something.
Because
Like,
you got to eat.
yeah, but it was
not
like
die.
it was closer to reality, and
That's
so
it.
like because there could have been relaxation as a necessity in like attention, so like it's a different. But like, yeah, you're out and about. It's like that heart rate's up. But then when you're chilling, like they probably were sleeping. Well, as long as they weren't, on watch. Also,
Well, that's it. I think that I think there was still stress, but the stress was more immediate, right? It was very much in your face. Not enough food. Oh shit, we're being attacked by a pack of wolves. That kind of
more
thing.
relevant fear than imagined fear.
And not to say it wasn't forward thinking, but it was as forward as the next maybe season or two.
Yeah, at the most.
At the most. Whereas now I think that there's less immediate danger, but there's more capacity to think about the future, which creates its own kind of stress.
Yeah.
So we've traded one for the other. It's a damn good question.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to mention that.
It's almost like that full, which maybe Jay was saying here. I'm trying to talk and read at the same time. Yeah, well, I think, and with the stress, I was just thinking, like, we almost stretch our stress out.
Yeah.
Like the more focused you are on the future, it's like that gap is like your stress in a sense, or how fixated. Like if you're thinking of hypothetical situations, well, any degree, but like way down the road, there's going to be a lot of stress there, and it's a constant. It's like a constant sort of like forward-looking thing, like this. Even just like doing things, the sort of classic, like, go to school to get a job to do this, to do this. It's like there's going to be a sort of natural, like typical continuous stress level with that. And so the spectrum of relaxation there is like has less potentials because that's always shifting. It's like the stress to relaxation is a big spectrum, but then it's like there's you vary and fluctuate in between that, and a lot of that has to do with how focused on controlling the future, especially you have, as opposed to bringing it back closer to and even when they were preparing for the next stuff, it's like still probably it wasn't stemming so much from like controlling it as much as like being ready.
Yeah, as much as you could be.
Yeah, being sensitive to
for
it.
Sure.
Sensitivity.
Like no refrigeration or anything, but you learn how to smoke your meat or salt your fish, do stuff like that. It's not going to last forever, but it gives you a little extra time.
Yeah.
Just in case.
Even now, our inventions, our modern inventions, and only have a limited shelf life as well. It's not like we've learned how to preserve food infinitely. Where our stuff is still only lasts for so long because you can't hold off change forever.
Yeah, exactly.
in our food and in life.
Well, that's why we see the fucking grocery stores ransack. I was just thinking of like, as soon as there's a question of like, COVID with toilet paper, it's like people panic and they're like, control as much as I can.
Yep.
And so like, if there's any sort of post-apocalyptic times ever, it's like everything that's under control right now, those preserves are going to get ripped away because people have very little faith in themselves to survive beyond, our convenient little situations that we've created for
Oh
ourselves.
man, just the fact that toilet paper is a fairly new invention
Oh
for
yeah, because we
humanity.
used to use bidets first, and before that, we just didn't really do too much.
We just dropped it and kept walking.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we just
Like
kept
there
But
were
the-
reasons the
yeah.
lifespan was
Look,
like
bidets are a great
35.
invention. If you haven't enjoyed a bidet, highly recommend taking it. The next opportunity you get, I say it's worth it. Go for it.
or at least a good strong spray bottle. So we do have another question here.
Real strong.
Absolutely. We've got a bunch actually on your feed as well.
Oh,
have
sweet.
have we
Check it
gotten to any of the, because I don't want to disregard the people on our TikTok account. Do you know we have a Dualistic Unity TikTok account, by the way, everyone? Check it out.
I
at
also
Dualistic Unity.
Yes, I switched it to
Ah,
mine as well
fair enough.
because we only had like 2 people on there.
Yes.
But I
So you
can
see, that's why you should be
go
following
back.
it at Dualistic Unity. We only had 2 people on there.
This there's a pre one to that. You guys say that anxiety is in us because we used to need to quote unquote survive more than modern day. Why are we not becoming less anxious as people?
I don't recall ever saying that.
Anxiety is in us because we used to survive.
No, we didn't.
I don't recall
We were
ever
saying
saying that. I mean, attention's always been there. I think
Yeah.
anxiety stems from your need for control. So, I mean, so much of society would almost make that anxiety worse.
Yeah,
And
like anxiety is very
So, yeah,
much.
no, I don't remember ever saying that.
Yeah. No, I don't think we did, but like just along those lines, it's like very much that idea that we can be in control has
Mhm.
gotten so strong and
Yeah.
like powerful that like anxiety goes with that.
Oh, and the
Like,
fear of losing control.
It's like the fear of losing control is extreme anxiety, especially if you like convince yourself that you're like losing control is, something that again could happen. That's why the tension, there can be so
Mhm.
much panic
right.
with any even a hit of that, and I made sure because we got people on there and not get restricted.
I'm
can,
on
like
the
send you.
Instagram. It doesn't care.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. It can send you so quick. Yeah,
Mhm.
I don't remember if I was going somewhere with that, but
Fair enough.
But the anxiety wasn't like created in our caveman times. It's just an expression of the experience that we're having. Is just another thing that's on the table, that's on the spectrum, which is why there is no I don't think it more or less is grown or increased. It just feels like it's more visible. I feel like the anxiety is more visible, which is why we say that there's a mental health crisis. But we've always been in a relationship with all the emotions that we could feel, with all of the potential. So I don't think it necessarily, we can't blame our caveman years for the anxiety that we feel in modern day times, but we can certainly understand why it would be, terrifying to think about that tiger in the bush. As soon as I met the tiger, I'd be like, all right, I don't want to meet him again.
Well, exactly. Those are probably the first like nightmares almost. It's like people
Right.
re-experiencing certain experiences as they were going.
Right, because anxiety is just a word, and we just talked about like how limited words and concepts are. So anxiety is just a word for a version of experience that we have lived through. And so we were like, that is anxiety, and that must have arrived at some point, because it could not have just been existence changing shape. No, it must be this new thing that arrived when we were in the caves. And it's like, it's not. It would be nice if it was, though.
Again, and it comes back to that, the description is not the described, and it's not. We always like to oversimplify things down to that, but yeah, it's so easy to. Yeah, I'm gonna let it go there.
Yeah.
I was just the description, not the described, in terms of emotions, especially like it's not always what we think it is, and it's not as simplistic as that. What was the original question?
It was something with I don't know. I had to.
We said something about the anxiety.
Anxiety. That.
Yeah.
So
it was
anxiety is a word.
Mhm.
It's a concept. And the problem with the concept is that it almost superimposes a filter over the experience. So you have an experience. All of a sudden, you're feeling something, and it's bringing your attention straight back to the moment, but it's not pleasant.
Right.
And so you label it anxiety, not remembering it's not pleasant because you so often invest in a certain feeling that isn't this, right? That feeling being security, comfort, certainty, having some sense of value, all of that. And all of a sudden your attention's right back here in the present. You're like, oh God, I'm anxious. What are you saying? I'm afraid of the future. I don't have a sense of control, but we commonly call it anxiety, and anxiety is not really a thing. It's not a thing. It's a concept. It's a word for an experience, for an emotion that we are translating through our mentality. And if that mentality is control, then all of a sudden the feeling that we're not in control and we have to pay attention sucks. Whereas if we're not invested in that sense of control, all of a sudden feeling like we're not in control and we have to pay attention is just a fucking Tuesday.
Yeah. And the more things you think you can control, the more ways that feeling has potential to come up. Like when you think there's a number of things, like your whole life, you think you're in control of your whole life, like that experience, there's like almost physical ways that we can try and, assume or at least build enough on top of just feeling itself that we can convince ourselves that we don't experience those things as much. But it can be a very, very numb experience, like cutting off the full extremes of the spectrum. Oh, sorry. I pause on that one if we wanted to talk about that.
I just wanted
at some point.
Yeah, that message has
kind
been
of
left consistently on other live streams too.
Yeah.
That's why I never read it. It's just because you can't keep saying the same thing and expect me to bite every time.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking while you guys were checking on that about like how I've been saying that life and potential and all these things change shape. And that's on the assumption that I'm kind of validating the smaller shapes and not the shape. Like everything technically could be just one giant shape. Instead, I'm looking at like all the little trees, and I'm like, those are individual trees instead of being like they're all just one massive super organism, like one massive super fucking multiverse and galaxies and all that shit. Like it's so funny how quickly I shrink. Like when I think of a shape, it's usually I start very small. I don't usually think like go out to in. I go in to out. Like the perspective is in to out versus out to in, because it's like when I look at this moment, I don't think this moment is all one shape. I think of all the little things, because all those little things have concepts and the concepts are small. So it's very reflective that my shapes are as small as my concepts typically.
Well done. We have another question. This one from the comment section on YouTube Live. Hello, and thank you for being here. Where do you stand on legal systems? Who wants to jump in on this one?
I mean, I can kick it off because I feel like I know the least about just legal systems in general. But I think from a general POV, like the structures in place, there's always, what's the phrase? Like for every law, there's...
You need two more?
You need two more. Yeah, basically. Because it's like under this idea that you can be in control of things and whatnot, that then, can stem from experiences that over time it makes sense to like put certain things in place. But when it becomes about, the following the rules themselves, it's like there's very little sensitivity. A lot of people can just like live trying to get away with things because things get big enough. And it's like this illusion that we can keep everything under control. It's like we're straight up in police state because we're assuming that like via the legal system, via police, via all these things that we can, they're all elements of just like being able, fire departments, being able to straight up have total control of reality. And so legal system are these points in place that can replace kind of like morality, replace sensitivity. So that's more of like a, general sort of thought, I guess. But yeah, that's where I'll start.
Nice.
Right. I think it's legal systems are just not as necessary as we think. And like one example of a legal system is like our transportation systems, like our transportation authority systems, and how, you know, we have great intentioned street lights and stop signs, but all of them drive the same lack of attention. You don't actually have to look at the street you're on because there are signs and lights that tell you exactly what's happening, and the signs tell you what you should do according to what's happening after it's already been kind of outlined. And it just doesn't seem as necessary because, you know, we have people that are, you know, speeding, so these laws aren't working. We have people that are running the stop signs, and then they're forced to go to driving school and take these courses that are showing you all the ways that you're supposed to be paying attention while giving you all the shortcuts to avoid attention. So it just feels like our legal systems are super counterproductive, that the intention was to do X, and we are doing the opposite of X when we implement the system that forces you or hinders you from actually paying attention to the fucking point, this moment, to begin with.
Yeah, I think that is the problem, is that you end up with a population of people who don't do certain things because they'll be punished rather than not doing those certain things because of a sense of empathy and awareness.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's ultimately the biggest problem with the idea that, you know, the law can somehow, I guess, supplement or replace our lack of self-awareness. And that it always ends up in kind of a downward spiral when it comes to society as a whole. Because again, without a responsible population, you're going to have more and more irresponsibility, which means you're going to need more laws in order to try and curtail that irresponsibility. And that just creates more irresponsibility down the road.
Yep.
So I'd say that legal systems are inevitable to some degree, but I think having an overarching legal system that covers such a large expanse of land and has no room for empathy or negotiation, right? I think where there is so much assumption, again, because judges don't know these people, lawyers don't know these people, you know, the cops don't know these. There's so much distance between ourselves. And I think that's the problem, is that we need to invest more in humanity. We need to invest more in actually having relationships, get away from this society that we're in now, where neighbors don't even meet each other, don't know each other, you know,
are scared to talk to each other.
Straight up. So I think that it's a way bigger thing than just, you know, what's the problem with the legal system? The legal system is a result of us just disconnecting from one another and then trying to have some kind of a band-aid solution to keep it all together and not going up literally in flames. Yeah, and that's a great question. I really appreciate you asking that. We have another one. How do you keep yourself in the present, prioritizing an experience?
Prioritizing experiences in like some
this is something that we said earlier. You know, you prioritize your experience, prioritize where you are here and now. How do you do that?
You pay attention, and and act according. And I think, like, you know, you have which we've done an episode on, Raise Holy Trinity, like relax, pay attention, be yourself, that whole thing, which is I really always have enjoyed the spin on, you know, the Christian Trinity sort of thing with that, because it's actually applicable things that happen in reality. But like in terms of staying in the present, it's just prioritizing it and not prioritizing something else. Like understanding I have 100% attention that I can divvy out into, you know, some sense of control, some other places, some other situations that aren't here. But if I am like utilizing that attention here, you know, then there isn't so much of a how. Like the how is the thinking, the how is the figuring out, the how is only ever going to take you from that. So even assuming that like there's a thing you can do to be more present, it's like you can only talk about it, of course, conceptually. And so prioritizing your experience right now, it's like it's not even necessarily prioritizing the situation of the experience, but like just the reality of like you being the experience right now can, you know, be a component.
Good question.
Yeah.
The first thing that comes to mind is honest reflections, and why that came up in my mind, I imagine, is because it feels like if I don't have to really become present or get there, every moment is an honest reflection of where the priority is. And so just looking at the moment that you're in usually will let you know where their priority is. Is it the experience, or is it thinking about the experience? And an example is when I find myself sitting in a chair and then all of a sudden a few minutes go by and I'm like, oh shit, fuck, how long? Wait, it's been a few minutes? Okay. Most likely that's a reflection that we were not prioritizing presence and being the experience. We were thinking about the experience, and we were either thinking about a past experience, not making the most of this experience, or another experience that we either think is there. And so, you know, an honest reflection is it here or there? And if there is the priority, you know it. And the same is in the opposite.
That was also a good answer. I have nothing to add to that whatsoever. But we do have another question, and this kind of goes back to the conversation we had previously regarding legal systems. What if the law only exists if you believe in it? I would say that that's a complicated one, and it's because while it's true the law exists through agreement, the law often exists before we're ever born. So we're born into a pre-existing legal system, and if we're like, well, I didn't agree to this, they don't give a shit.
Yeah.
They don't
You
care
have-
whatsoever. And you know, it's specifically in our system, especially because it is all contract law, and often, well, not often, but all the time, our parents unwittingly sign contracts on our behalf.
Yep.
To
Birth
put us
certificate.
within the system. Exactly. The birth certificate, your social security or social insurance number,
Yep.
you know, all of that stuff. So you're already part of the legal system. So whether you believe in it or not is a moot point at this
Right.
point. But that said, I would say that not basing your actions on the law, actually basing it on empathy, basing it on awareness, basing it on attention.
Mhm.
I mean, that changes how you think about the world and your life. Like, I don't go out there trying to be a law-abiding citizen. I'm just as authentic a person as I can be.
Yeah.
You know, meaning I'm way less likely to want to hurt or harm or take advantage of anyone.
Mhm.
Right? Exactly. It doesn't make any sense to do so. And so I would say that that you're right, that it does exist, you know, through our belief. But on the other hand, we still are put into it. We are still a part of this. And you can try and learn the system. And I want to tell you right now, listener, holy shit, did I ever go far down that rabbit hole? You can learn all about contract law, the Uniform Commercial Code. You can learn about your birth certificate, the corporation that is essentially your name, and everything that goes along with how commerce on this planet is ultimately run, and even grow an awareness about how pretty much every act in law and statute are acts of commerce now, because it's all we know how to do. You know, like when somebody is sent to jail, for example, there is a penal sum that is attached with that ruling. There is currency that is actually created through that person's time in jail. Like, there's value that's made because it's a human being's time, and human beings are ultimately the value.
Yeah.
Which is why none of our money is actually money, because it doesn't have value. They're all IOUs because we're the ultimate value. Right? So you can go down that whole thing. You can get really caught up in trying to learn the system, to beat the system, and then they'll just change the fucking system.
Mhm.
Right? And that's it. They'll just change it because they don't give a shit about you, because you were born into a power structure that is very well established. But
Yep.
to change your mentality to a point where you no longer think of yourself as a part of that system, where it's going on around you, but you are existence itself.
Mhm.
You don't need that buffer. You don't need those walls. You don't need those people to tell you what not to do. Then it becomes almost like a non-consideration.
Mhm.
And one ripple at a time, we create a more responsible world, which creates a more responsible system around it. So maybe that's the whole point. You know, it's so easy to get caught in this paradoxical, but the system is making us irresponsible while we act irresponsibly, encouraging the system to take more responsibility, which makes us irresponsible.
Yeah.
If the only way out of that is to become more responsible individually and then
Mhm.
watch the system come about accordingly. But we don't like that. It doesn't offer, you know, an immediate solution. But it does offer a change, and it's not being more responsible, like get out there and run for government, you know, get out there and vote. No, it's be responsible in your day-to-day life. Be responsible when you meet people in your neighborhood. Recognize You're all in this shit together. You're all in this shit together. Instead of just walking by and going, well, I don't need to know them. Say hello. Change the world through yourself.
Amen. It's like if we're all in shit, then you handling your shit gives you some more space to handle other shit. So it's like it starts with you. The priority is you in the sense of your experience, not in the sense of like you being something for the world or building some sort of thing. But the side of that too, that I think, whatever that initial question was like, oh, like, do the law exist if you don't believe in it? Like, yeah, it is something you're buying into, but like, there are a lot of ways that we buy into that. Like, there's a lot of conveniences in place, like all of the structures of cities, roads, like there's realities of the system that, because we continue to take so much part in, it's like it's really easy to kind of control, manipulate, instill more and more laws on top of that. Like we saw that with COVID, with the gym going out thing. Like as soon as those were closed down and those conveniences were taken that we're so bought into and feel like we need, which stems from a lot of things that we felt like we needed stem from this sort of source of feeling lack. It's easy to control and manipulate that sense and put more and more laws in place and even instill more and more fear, because there is less personal responsibility for just that sense of lack. Like when there isn't so much of a sense of lack, that responsibility can come back to you. Because if it is that side of like, the discussion of the Matrix and whatnot, and the whole Andrew Tate side of that, how like, getting out of the Matrix is like achieving all this stuff and having all this stuff and having the like 17 cars and blah, 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 like all those things. It's like, no, that's actually heavily bought into this, response to a sense of lack, as opposed to not needing so much. Again, who has more, the man who has everything or the man who wants nothing? In that sense of like not needing so many things, because you are being personally responsible for your life and your emotions, like handling your own shit, handling your own experience. And so
right. No, well, a scammer or a manipulator's favorite customer is a rushed buyer, right? It's the person who wants the shortcut, which makes total sense, because the scammer, the manipulator, is someone who's trying to leverage things to get their own shortcut. So doesn't it make sense that their best customer would be themselves, someone who also wants a shortcut, who also wants to not pay attention, get there? And so it's like, it's been so easy for this system, this government to operate, because they're doing the same thing that a lot of its buyers are doing, which is just trying to buy and sell a shortcut, because we think that paying attention is such a burden, when it's diving into the experience of life and feeling like life is this bottomless ocean and you can go under the water and hold your breath for as long as possible, instead of being afraid and staying at the surface.
This has been a hell of an episode so far. We still got some time left. I appreciate all of the questions that are coming in from Instagram, TikTok. Otherwise, we got a question right here. Can you explain ways to tell yourself on how to regulate the nervous system when you're overstimulated? My biggest suggestion here would be to stop thinking about your nervous system and start thinking about your response to it. If you're trying to control your nervous system, that is immediately a fear response. Right. And so what you want to do is feel what you're feeling and remind yourself that the idea that it's too much for you, the idea that you are overstimulated, is an idea based on a concept of yourself that isn't necessarily the truth. This is the hardest thing. And I say this as somebody who is extremely hypersensitive to everything: touch, sound, taste, everything. I'm extremely hypersensitive. The only thing that helped me was to recognize how fucking strong I already am. There's this idea that I couldn't take it, and it's what made me flinch away from all of that. And it's the same thing for you when you're feeling overstimulated, as it were. Most of that stimulation is actually coming from the panic, not from the stimulation itself. And so you're feeling everything amplified because of your response to what you're feeling, not because of what you're feeling. And if you can remind yourself that, you will find that it starts to subside, because now you're just watching it, not telling yourself anything about it or your ability to deal with it. Now, that said, there's also a lot to be said for habit and being reasonable with yourself. So do that. And then when you feel like, okay, but this is becoming a bit too much, because you will habitually reach for that sometimes until one day you don't, then pat yourself on the back for sitting through it for however long you did, and maybe like just exit stage left, as it were. Give yourself a little bit of a breather, because your brain will remember that you sat through that quote unquote overstimulation, and it will re-gauge what it means by overstimulated. It will reassess your strength accordingly. So this is where exposure therapy and all that comes in.
Right.
You are learning that you are stronger than you think. So I would say, just try to focus on the difference between your response to the experience and the experience itself.
Yeah, because even that word, like over, it's like that's a component of your response. Like it's almost like it can be so quick, be so habitual that it seems like it's a thing in itself, but it's adding the over to the stimulation. It's like, yeah, you're always stimulated. There's a fluctuation based on where your attention is, what things that you're doing are. Like if you're skydiving, that's going to be a lot of stimulation, a lot of sensations are going on there. To say that you're overstimulated, despite it being probably more stimulation than if you're just sitting there kind of panicked thinking about things, like you wouldn't think of that so much as over. So over is very much a label based on, it's like what you think you can handle. And the beauty of experiencing more things, like just experiencing new things, like when things are on the table, you see different options, different ways to live your life, like choosing the one that is just unfamiliar, just choosing the less familiar things over and over. It's like that can be sort of a direction, or not mentality to like buy into or whatever. Like I always do new things, whatever. But like when there are decisions, it can be something that you factor in. It's like, okay, I've done this before. I haven't done this before. This is a way to expand my experience. This is a way to expand my world. Is there going to be more stimulation that comes with that? Yes. But, as you said, there's going to be the ability to handle more stimulation as well as you experience new things. But it can be almost hard to experience, or like you can't get used to more experiences by not doing more experiences. Like you can't read about it, you can't watch videos about it, you can't just listen to podcasts on the drive home every day, getting hype, and then getting to work and doing stuff. Like, yeah, absolutely. But it's like those things in and of themselves, there can be such a priority, because we prioritize like feeling good and feeling comfortable. It's like, oh, I'm learning stuff, so I'm feeling good in the comfort of like all of these familiar things, and I'm just thinking about myself a little bit better, as opposed to actually doing shit which comes with a lot of stimulation. But yeah, the assumption, even, and with something like anxiety or any of the things that we label, like assuming that they shouldn't be, assuming that like, oh, this is something wrong, anxiety disorder. It's like, God damn, that is really a great way to be able to, as soon as there's that extra stimulation, assume it's anxiety, fall into this whole story as to why this is the case and why you're responding in this way, instead of that kind of being not as relevant to just like feeling a lot right now. Because it's always energy that you're feeling, and you're assuming what that is, and a lot of that can be very, very habitual.
Yeah, this is so much versus too much.
Yeah.
And it's so often that we will say that this is too much, and and we can say that about situations, circumstances, people. I have both felt that way and had people tell me that they felt that way about me, and so people are often quick to say this is too much. I can't handle this. But it's it's just as easy to describe things as this is so much. This is so much. And so am I. And just as much as you've never reached the bottom of the ocean of your idea of you, you've also never reached the bottom of the ocean of experience. And both you can explore a little bit deeper. And so I appreciate that, being able to just know that that feeling like it's too much isn't the only possibility, isn't the only perspective, and that if too much is valid, so is so much.
Yeah, straight up, good answers all around. And the person followed up and said, "Great answer, thank you." And then it makes you feel crazy because you ask yourself, "Why am I freaking out over something so small?"
I love that question.
Absolutely, but I think
Where's
it's
my
that.
straight jacket? I'm gonna bedazzle it.
The best answer there, I think, for me would be habit. I mean, we all go through the stages of ego development. From children, we form an idea of ourselves that makes us feel safe, gives us some idea of how to interact with the world, and we rely so much on that idea of ourselves that it's a hell of a leap of intuition to suddenly let that idea of yourself go as you get older. And that's very much what we're talking about here. Is all of a sudden you're dealing with a lot, and you immediately run back to your idea of yourself to determine whether or not you can deal with that lot. And that is something that we learn very young. And as we grow and we mature and we push our boundaries, we start to realize that is the only way to push our boundaries, is to push past that idea of who we think we are.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say that when you look at yourself and you're like, God, why am I freaking out over something so small? I'll just go, right, because I kind of learned to, and then that's it. Just shrug it off. It's like, right, because I learned to. I learned to over a long time, and it kind of became a reflexive action when dealing with life as a whole. But that's all. It just became a reflex that you've done so often. And if you can just laugh it off and go, right, but I just caught it. That is how you break that habit. A little bit at a time, one moment at a time, when you suddenly face the idea of yourself and you go, oh my God, there's so much conflict and suffering there. And you go, but I'm not that. And then all of a sudden you're just left with uncertainty and the question of whether or not you're willing to walk forward into it. There is no idea of yourself to rely on that is ever going to lead you into the unknown. It will just lead you back in circles in what you know. It helps to remember that. If you really want your life to change, you need to let go of the idea of yourself that you have become attached to, because that's what keeps it the same.
Yeah, and it can feel like as you were talking, I was imagining driving a car, and the idea of yourself is in the back seat or it's in the trunk or whatever. And it's very much like, as you go through life, as you go through experiences, it's like a constant sort of like, oh boy, here's something coming up. Can I handle it? Look back and check in. And based on a past experience, past response, habitually oh, I've always responded to this with anxiety. That's what we're going to do to validate myself, just because that's the priority, is validating myself, instead of, okay, here's a new situation, glance back and be like, oh, right, that doesn't actually help me handle this situation. It's no help whatsoever in only in reference, really, only in as you're interacting, as you're going. It's it's there, but it's kind of I don't know, your car. It's you're aware that it's there, but how you're thinking about it and continuing to look back and how you handled things, to the point that if someone, and you see this a lot of times with sometimes older generations, even that are very, very set in their ways, it's they're basically driving with their seat, with their head turned over their shoulder, staring at I've lived, I'm satisfied with my life. I'm satisfied with where I've gotten right now. And it's very little forward looking. And so your experience can become very small. You don't try many new things because, you take a second to look forward, and all of a sudden it's a new sort of situation. And so you're not sure how to handle that. And so you just keep kind of driving in the same circle for the rest of your life, because you've kind of figured out okay, this is a circle. I've gone through this. I know this road very well, but there's nothing new there. It's just something to do, more or less. And we see certain experiences as a product of that, certain things that, you go to, I don't know, a retirement community, and it's not to say specifically stuff like that, but stuff like that, the whole mentality of kind of just staying comfortable and familiar and maintaining yourself is very much, it's like a point where everything has to be familiar. I think if a component of how you think about yourself sometimes can be jumping in to new things, then there can almost be like a cultivation there, that like that's a side of you. But as you're there, it's like, it's not helpful to look to that. So there is usually people like that are more generally relaxed. People who are explorers, they're relaxed in their experience because it's less about them and more about, the journey, like the what's in the view on the windshield, past the windshield of the car.
Mm-hmm. Right. And their fear, and when the adventurers, for the, maybe to some degree, their fear is just it's just along for the ride. Like, it's not a problem that they feel that fear. And so I always like the definition of courage, or at least paraphrasing for the most part, was just that it wasn't an absence of fear. It was moving forward despite the fear, in the same way that I imagine an adventurer would. Like, it's not that they're not afraid, that they're so relaxed, guru yoga, just a guru kind of enlightened, like, no fear, I will trudge on. It was just like, fear is just along for the ride, and it wasn't something to avoid. And I like the analogy of the car, and for a lot of older people, it's like they are on autopilot. They're not paying attention, and they've got pre-programmed routes into the autopilot, so they don't actually have to pay attention because they've got these safe routes loaded into the car, and they don't have as much curiosity to venture out of those pre-approved routes. And because it's pre-approved, they don't have to pay attention. They don't have to be necessarily sensitive to the experience of being in the car, of getting out the car, of stopping, of enjoying the view, of enjoying the ride. It's very empty, and very small, because it's just that route. But we always have that potential. And even with the autopilot, even with the pre-approved routes, like, it doesn't mean that you couldn't turn off the autopilot at any time. And so I love to, when I have conversations with somebody that's discounted themselves because of an age, and it's like, that's not the barrier you think it is, because at any moment, all that potential is still there. And no matter what someone has done at any age, no matter how much you compare yourself, all the potential that someone else has, so do you. And it reminds me of a conversation I had with a cab driver who was a little older and was like, oh, I've got my family. I can't really move, because I had just told the cab driver I had moved here from the States. And he's like, oh, I couldn't do something like that. I was like, as much as that is normally the case, I know people who have kids and are in full blown, have careers, and they move. So it's like, barriers aren't as set in stone as we might think. And what is easily perceived as a wall could get transformed into a bridge.
Well said. Well said. We are coming to the end of this episode. We still have tons of questions in social media and in the comments section. I wish we had time to get to all of them. We are going to wrap up and continue on Patreon, though. If you would like to join us in a group discussion, you can do so. It's a tier 1 call today, which means it's only $5 a month if you'd like to join. We do this 5 days a week. Lots of conversation, lots of discussion. If that's your bag, definitely join us. Patreon.com/Dualistic Unity. I'm going to wrap up on this question here, but there's so much more I'd like to talk about in terms of this question. Do you think now will ever end? And I just want to say, I love this question, because let's just assume that the universe and existence did cease to be. It went back to whatever it was before the Big Bang, let's just say. Okay. How long? For how long? Until all of a sudden it Big Bangs again, in which case anything that experienced time after that would once again be in the now. And can there be an existence without the experience of the now? Because I would say that everything that happens after the Big Bang, quote unquote, after, is in fact everything that exists in potential before, quote unquote, before the Big Bang. And that all we're experiencing is one of the potential stories that everything in potential could exist, could experience. This is just one universe in a countless number of them that all exist now. Because without now, there is no experience of what is. And there is always the potential to experience oneself. That is all I got. And we're going to wrap this up because I know it's going to be a damn good conversation on Patreon after this. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. We're going to be back tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern time for, what is it, call-in show?
I think
I think it's a call-in show, possibly. Yeah.
Pretty sure.
Either way, you could participate. We'd love to have you there. We'll talk to you soon, everyone.